good. I'm gonna go ahead and start recording. Okay, and we're back after the break. I was joking with someone. I was with uh, Kyle yesterday, and his what happened? Like his like laptop like fell off or something like that. It just completely fell off, and I was like, I'm just gonna use this in the future. I'm just gonna use this as an opportunity to plug like to advertise, like just be like, this is
Yeah.
sponsored by Lay's. Like I told him I was just gonna grab. I don't have any actual sponsors, so I'm just gonna grab random shit that has logos on it around me. And but yeah, anyway, so music. I was asking you, I think, if you kind of are you intent on kind of being an audio engineer long term, or do you intend to eventually become a performer?
Well, I've been performing for years. Since I was pretty heavily performing since I was about 16 or 17. I started performing at a young age, like about 15,
Word.
just on my own and through bands and stuff. And then really, I got into the audio through just kind of on my own, and more I started going to different studios and started liking it more and more.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, like I love performing, but there's something about the studio, like it gives me that feeling. Like whenever I'm at a studio doing audio work, time just flies by. It could be like 4 or 5 hours gone by, and then I'm just like, oh shit,
Hell yeah. That's how you know.
I'm just in it. Yeah.
That's what's up. Yeah, I think. Uh, so you're saying that's just kind of where you're at. You just kind of enjoy it. You like it. You may not be. Who knows? Life can go all kinds of directions. Like
Yeah,
we're
yeah. I
young.
mean, yeah, you're right. It can, but I mean, another part of it is just like being a performing musician isn't always the most financially stable thing.
Exactly.
You gotta find other things, especially like if you work in music. Like a lot of times you have to find different avenues for money. Like teaching lessons, doing engineering, even performing.
Yeah, I've had that conversation a lot. So of course, like a lot of us have like different creative passions, even if it's not music, like whether it's
Yeah,
art or things like that. And of course, yeah, it can be a struggle to be like that pure ideal like rock star or pure like successful artist.
hmm,
It's something worth shooting for, and of course, it's possible.
it is.
But
Yeah,
you do have to be reasonable, and you do have to have a backup, and you do have to have these auxiliary kind of things that you do. And like you're proving, like a lot of those things can be very relevant, and kind of go hand in hand with it. So I definitely appreciate that you've kind of found that route already. I'm sure I think a lot of musicians, like as you kind of get older, you kind of and see it happened for me too. With I was really into art and animation, and I kind
yeah,
of really focused on that. But then I started to ask questions about like why I wanted to do it, and yeah, questions about why I wanted to do it. And what that did for me is it kind of showed me the things about art that I valued that didn't have to be art itself. Like I just valued being creative. I valued being expressive. I valued being able to make a difference. And I realized that those elements carried over into a lot of things like programming and building communities and doing
oh,
stuff like
yeah,
this.
sure. And I like that because like I kind of had to ask myself that question too, like, why am I doing this? Well, why am I doing music? And because growing up, of course, like I wanted just to be a rock star,
Hell
as a
yeah.
teenager, and that was just the goal. But then I realized, like, how do I do that? I'm like, is that really what I wanted?
Exactly, because
And
like
now,
it's an option. Like it's possible. Like if you take the right route and you make the right sacrifices and you really want it, you can make that happen. But you're really asking yourself that question and saying, "Is that what I want?"
yeah, and that's the thing, like, doing that kind of career takes a lot of life size sacrifices,
It really
like
does.
with
Unfortunately.
families and loved ones. Like I'm
Yeah.
not saying that it always is a lonely life, but
Yeah.
in a lot of cases it can be that for
Oh
sure.
yeah, yeah. It's man. There's I'm sure there's countless examples of sacrifices that successful people have had to make, and then some people they make sacrifices and they still don't succeed. So it's just a really tough route, and I'm not like I don't I never want to just shoot someone down from it like straight up, but I definitely like I
Yeah,
strongly recommend people like to just kind of ask those questions, think about other ways. Like the world needs a lot of different things right now. I think we're in a very unique time right now. Just kind of like culture, the way that culture is being affected by the internet and like the explosion of music. We have so much music, and to me, one of the things that I see is like almost more than just a whole bunch of new musicians. We need a lot of people to just kind of break down what's already out there because there's so much shit out there.
no,
You know.
you're totally right because like now more than any time ever, we're able to just go on the internet and find things we've never heard before, find new music. Like, and you could go on the internet every day and find like 10 new artists, or probably even 100 that there's so
Yeah,
much out there
it's
now.
over. It's overwhelming because it's like, I think I remember in terms of my art, like the internet at first was very inspiring. It's like, oh, look at all this cool stuff, and I want to do it like that. But then it almost got to the point where I was just like so consumed by the content that was out there
There's
that
too much out.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then there was just like so much, and I wasn't even hardly inspired to create my own because I was just like, well, if I had some idea, the chances are it was kind of already done. So I don't know. It's really wild, and I still do paint and stuff for fun, digital paint. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting situation we're in. It. One thing I wanted to say is that I don't know if you know, I don't know how plugged in you are in different areas around around Georgia, but so I was kind of involved in this kind of like sort of like a hardcore like metal scene, kind of northwest of Atlanta, sort of like stretching from like what's it called, like Lithia Springs to Dallas to Kennesaw and so
Yeah.
forth. And there was a lot of different bands and people and stuff, and I kind of related to them through Facebook and memes. But there was one guy who really stood out to me. His name is Dylan Christopher, and I think I met. He was like one of the first people I met in the scene because he was really into memes and whatnot. And then also in terms of that, how he interacted with the music scene was he was the one who was organizing a lot of the events and designing the posters and designing the brand tees and and his knowledge of music both locally and globally was just incredible. Like he just knows all these different genres, and I don't know, he really stood out to me. I really appreciated that. Uh, and I don't know, yeah, I don't know if you know him or any people like that, but I really value that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, like people like that, I really appreciate and are really awesome because when it comes to music, you can't, especially like a music scene, you can't just have your one band or your one guy who plays the music or writes the music, whatever. You have people like that who either play music or they book shows or they hook bands up together, put on events and
Exactly,
promote. And
exactly.
it takes a what's that saying? Like it takes a whole house or
It
like
takes a village or to well they say
yeah,
it
exactly.
takes a
Yeah,
village to raise a kid. It's the same thing. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Like I definitely there's a lot of value to communities that can kind of they have different specializations and they can work together. Because like I've said it, I said that like a lot of different music scenes I see around here. That's the weakness I see is that they're all kind of trying to be that superstar.
hmm
And no one's really supporting each other. They're all kind of like kind of working against each other whenever they could be building up the scene together. So it's just kind of part of it.
yeah. And I mean, I'm kind of an optimist, so I like to believe in like love for another artist, like among artists. But I mean, the the reality of it is like at the end of the day you are competing, you're in competition with other bands, or if you're in a band you're in competition with other bands in your area, but at the same time, like it doesn't that's not the only thing it has to be, yeah, at the end of the day you're trying to be successful and you're trying to be more successful than this guy, but also at the same time you want to build a scene, and I feel like that's what's really going to give you like longevity. If you can build a scene of like loyal fans,
Yep.
loyal friends and bands, then that's what's really gonna propel you along the way instead of just being like this, all closed off.
Absolutely. I think you made some good points. Like I was gonna say, like number one, competition itself, of course, isn't necessarily negative. There can be a lot of healthy competition. Number two, there's a lot of room for like, of course, the collaboration that happens at the same time. It's not purely competitive, like shutting everything else down. And then
hmm
number three, like you're absolutely right. Like if you're able to kind of focus on the experience and focus on the local scene and just yeah build like a family, build like a community, then that's going to be a help. And I think the successful bands that have blown up are the ones that basically learn to do that. Like they learn to kind of just focus on their local scale and say, hey, we're just gonna we're not gonna, because I think what happens a lot of times, and this is not just music, this is like anytime someone has a dream, a lot of times people have like this ideal vision, and they're so set on this exact kind of idea they have that they may compromise other things, and
Yeah.
they may even hurt their own chances of reaching that by doing so. You have to. It's a really interesting approach that I think you have to have with reality. You kind of have to have your vision and your dream and what you're pursuing, but you also have to be very flexible, and you have to be ready if life throws you a curveball and says that, hey, I want you to do this, you have to kind of be like, I think, yeah, I feel it. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
no, you're completely right, and like I had that realization myself where it's like I was trying to focus on getting what I wanted to just one way. I wanted to perform, I wanted to be a rock star, whatever. So I was like, okay, that's the one way. But then the older I get, the more I realize, like, okay, well, why would I just try to do one thing when I can really affect all these different facets and avenues? Like, I can go through audio engineering, help people that way, get into a scene that way, and then, as well as performing and then helping other artists book shows, and
Absolutely.
along with like giving vocal lessons. I teach, I've been a music teacher for years, like guitar, ukulele, voice. So, just all these different avenues that I can go through to do art and do music, which is really, at the end of the day, that's really what I want to do. I want to be able
Absolutely.
to live life and, play my music and be involved with it.
Hell yeah.
And like, yeah, I have all these different avenues I can do that through. So why just be like tunnel vision,
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like yeah, diversity is so important and something that I've definitely picked up on. Like again, I was kind of the same way back in the day. I think it's very natural for a lot of people to kind of gravitate towards one kind of thing, whether it's music or art or sports or whatnot. But I started to unpack what it was that drew me to it. Like I was saying earlier, I started to ask those questions. Why? And that's what kind of turned me down all these other directions as I started to learn more about myself and the world, and I started to really open myself up and say, hey, I want to try this and I want to do that, and I can also, you can just do all these things at once, and they all feed into each other, and they all grow to just create like a greater diversity of experience for sure.
Yeah. So, what got you into art?
I think my thing was just just being exposed to it as a kid. I think it's pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah, just I liked cartoons a lot. I like animation and cartoons. So just being exposed to that stuff as a kid and just like that built an entire world for me. Like that was just like, this is so cool. Like what you can do, you can draw these characters and just come up with this crazy story. And I was just like, as soon as I was always drawing as a kid, and then around the time of middle school. I started to like draw cartoons and just kind of went from there, and yeah, I stuck with it, and I really like telling stories, and I really like that. And then it wasn't until after high school and college, because there was a lot of pressure at that time to kind of figure out what I wanted to do, because I was in college and I was going towards a computer science degree, just because that was something I just kind of chose by default. But then I was asking that question of like, what do I want to do with this? Like, what do I want to do in my life? And so that I put that pressure carried over to my art, and I was like, okay, what kind of story do I want to tell? What kind of world do I want to build? What kind of message do I want to have? And that's what kind of really, it was really great, because that kind of question, that line of questioning, is what really kind of sparked my spiritual journey. That's absolutely what did it. And that was just an explosion that's I can hardly explain.
Yeah.
What about
No.
what about you? How'd you get into music?
Well, I mean, I always loved music and art as a kid, just like growing up. Anything like at school, if we had like art class, I was always a kid. I didn't want to really play sports or anything, and was never really interested into it. But anytime we had art class or anything creative like that, I always loved it.
Hell
And
yeah.
like I loved video games,
Yeah.
which is a huge form of art. I mean,
Oh yeah. It's sound.
yeah,
It's
man, because
storytelling. It's
sound,
gameplay. It's
music, yeah, it's basically every art form combined into one,
oh yeah. It's
But
intense.
yeah, I was super into video game, and like I wanted to be a video game designer up until I picked up a guitar, really,
Hell yeah.
for the longest time, and then like I was telling you earlier, before we got on, I was I started hearing like the old rock music, like AC/DC and Zeppelin and all that, and I was like, what the fuck is this? And then immediately after that, it just
Yeah.
sent me down the road of like music
Hell yeah.
from on.
That's really cool. Like one thing I like to think about is that like I think as we get older, we kind of get exposed to a lot of things, and we kind of get almost desensitized to it a lot of times. But like that initial moment of being exposed to something and like for the first time and be like, what the fuck is this? And it's just incredible. And like it's cool that new generations get to keep having that feeling. They get to keep like just people are always just people are waking up to ACDC every day and being like, what is this? This is something new.
Yeah, and well, yeah, that's the funny thing. They've been around for so long, but now you have the internet. Like, kids with iPads who are like
Three
9 years old, three.
3-year-olds
You're
headbanging to some
right,
ACDC.
but it's funny because the way that back then, it's not too long ago, but I didn't have like we didn't have iPads and stuff growing up like that. Because you're what 23, I'm 24, so
Yeah,
yeah, well, we're about that same. So
did not
with
have
me,
iPads.
the way I discovered that older music was I was going through the basement throwing my mom's old stuff, and I see like Slayer and Metallica and ACDC and all of them. Like, well, what's this, Mom? I start.
Well, do you remember like so you what were you around like 8 or 9? Like, do you remember your mom's face whenever you like discovered Slayer and you're just like, what's this, Mom?
Well, no, the funny thing is, she thought nothing of it. She was like, he's not gonna be into that or whatever, you know. She's just like, oh, it's just some of my old stuff, and I was like, oh, well, I'm gonna take that, you know, and check it out. And then, but afterwards, it was so, it was just the irony, the irony, because I guess she didn't think I was gonna be into it at all, because she was a metalhead back then, and then I ended up becoming a metalhead through her influence involuntarily, you
Hell
know.
yeah. That's it. That's how life happens, man. It was destined. That's interesting. I didn't inherit too much from my parents. I was definitely exposed to certain things like just from radio and TV and stuff. I think my dad had some Eagles stuff, and
Yeah.
so that some of that kind of kick started it, and it just kind of went from there for sure. Um, so yeah, I was thinking about segueing and kind of going into another kind of dimension, which is kind of tied into some things we've already talked about already, which is psychedelics.
Okay,
So,
okay.
so I kind of mentioned like for me, like kind of starting out with art, digging in deeper into it, asking this question of what do I want to do with it, and as I started to get deeper into that, that's also whenever I was kind of smoking for the first time, like cannabis, and also kind of getting exposed to acid, and that shit just all combined, also combined with kind of the power of the internet and all the information that's out there was just an absolute fucking explosion. Like I was just like I was
Absolutely.
learning about science and evolution, and I was learning about psychology and archetypes and dreams and all this weird shit, and reading about all the different psychedelics while doing it's just like what the fuck, like, so this is
Yeah,
just
no,
huge.
it opens to like whenever you start doing that, it opens up ways of thinking and just things you've never thought about or would have been interested in before ever. You know, you start doing psychedelics, and then all of a sudden, all these new things are open up to you. It's crazy.
Hell yeah, like it was just, I mean, I just thinking about it now, like the transition from like being a kid out of high school kind of in a pretty bubble mentality, like pretty plugged into the matrix, to like a complete ripping out of the cables and like just being like, here's the entire, like here's the world, and like holy shit, dude, I'm still processing that, like I'm still processing that to this day, like
Yeah,
piecing it
it's the
together.
same, man. Yeah.
But I've definitely come a long way in kind of understanding the nature of the experience, and ultimately, it's and one of the big things about it too for people who may not have done it is there's this perception that it's like and this was my perception going into it, which is that it was going to take me to some place,
Mhm.
kind of like what you see with DMT. It's like it's taking you to a place, but really to me, acid in particular was one of the ones that hit me the hardest, and it was just like it's just here and now, but just a different perspective on what you're experiencing.
Yeah, exactly. With me, it made me. It depended on the trip too, but sometimes it made me extremely present and aware of things going on. And then,
Exactly.
like, before I thought like I was present and aware of a lot of things. And then, I started taking like LSD and mushrooms, and then realizing there's all these things I'd never noticed before.
Oh God, yeah.
It's simple things like I remember, and it's some of the smallest things that are the most profound. Like I remember seeing trees that just how they stand up straight and they kind of wave it in the air back and forth,
They're
and
alive, yeah.
it looked like they were writing in cursive.
Wow.
And
That's really trippy.
it just like it was just the most amazing thing ever.
Yeah,
And
definitely,
then,
definitely. Yeah, those kind of. I remember my first trip. Like, I just had no idea what to expect. Like, I had some idea. I had researched this stuff, but like, still, like, nothing could prepare you. And like, I remember I was actually around other people and whatnot. So that was just like crazy. Like being around other people who were like sober and don't really know much about it, and you're trying to like be a human being is just like it actually takes a monumental amount of effort to just be a human, to just like I need to act like a human right now. Like that's why after my first experience, I was like, you know what, like
that gets more and more true.
yeah, like my second starting on my second trip, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna put myself in an environment to where I do not have any expectations at all. Like I can literally be whatever the fuck I want. And so I tripped alone, and that's what really, really, really allowed me to just open up, go deeper into my own head, and figure shit out. But that first time was, yeah, that was like nuts, and I was, yeah, it was. Oof.
No, it really changed my perspective the first time because I really thought I knew what to expect. You know, like I had done other drugs. Like well, in my younger years, well, I say younger years, but really like a few years ago. You know,
Yeah,
I experimented with a lot of drugs, and I was like, oh, it's just gonna get me high, whatever. It's gonna be fun.
yeah.
And I was like at a party in Atlanta, and then I try it for the first time, and all of a sudden, you know, like an hour later. I'm outside by myself on the roof, just thinking like this is some serious shit. Just looking at the stars, and I'm like, dude,
Dude, I mean, I really, I kind of try not to get too sucked into this notion, but
yeah,
I mean, there is something about the experience. It's literally like something is being turned on that was previously off,
hmm
and I'm just not sure if there's any other way that that can be turned on. It's like you're literally become alive. You're kind of just like, what the actual fuck? I am a human being like on this planet in space, and like, what the fuck is going on? No one knows what's going on. It's crazy.
yeah, and you know, it made me question everything. And you know, for the first time in my life, I was really I wasn't scared to question a lot of things that were kind of drilled into my head. For you know, like I grew up kind of in a Christian home, you know, and
Same.
just raised to think a certain way, believe a certain way, and you know.
Absolutely.
I rebelled against a lot of it, but at the same time, I was really scared to question a lot of things up until I started taking more psychedelics and then started thinking in different ways. Then all of a sudden, I wasn't really scared to question all these things and just find my own truth.
Hell yeah. What would you say was like one or some of the main things that scared you about questioning? Were you very conscious of it, or was there a particular reason that you can think of as why you didn't want to question things?
Well, to me, it would like for example, let's just talk about Christianity. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
so all my life, I'd kind of I'd been raised in that, and I was scared to question it just because the way it was taught to me. You know, you're taught like,
Heaven and
you know,
hell. Yeah.
yeah, heaven and hell.
Going to
Like,
hell, boy.
if you
Not
believe
don't question that
in
shit.
God Daddy, then you go to heaven. If you don't, then you go to hell. And if you
Yeah.
question, don't do that. You
Yeah,
know.
it's such a, it's so obvious like how it functions. It's like a brainwashing mechanism. It's literally, yeah. It's like if you question, you go to
It's
hell.
obvious now to me, but you know, growing up as a kid,
You don't know. You have no idea. You know that's what
you're
you. That's
a
what,
lot more vulnerable, and it's just
you
whatever you're told as a kid is the truth.
Yeah,
You know.
exactly. And you want to be optimistic as a kid. I think we're naturally optimistic and saying, "Hey, my parents have the best interest. Like this must be what people is going on and stuff."
Yeah,
But
and I found myself questioning it a lot in my head just naturally. But then I'd catch myself questioning, go, no, you can't do that. Stop. You know, like
yeah,
you'll hard.
it's dude. If you read 1984, it's literally like double think. It's literally like you have an idea, but then you have this kind of thing that's in your head where you kind of
Stop.
you
Stop
check
thinking that.
yourself like God's watching. Like it's absolutely crazy, dude. Like and even so, like you're saying, like I started to rebel as well. I started to as I got older, and I kind of so around like high school, I started to understand a little bit more about science. I started to question it. I had a friend who was atheist. I saw other religions. I just stopped. I was just not interested in church, just as like in general, not
Yeah.
outside of the ideas. But it wasn't until I actually think I've honestly said the thing that gave me that big thing, the thing that gave me like a big breakthrough was I think evolution. Like just evolution was something that gave me the like once I understood that, like once that clicked for me, and I'm sure cannabis may have been involved in perhaps acid. I think it was a little bit before acid, so maybe some cannabis, but in general, once I kind of conceptualized evolution, that gave me the strength and the confidence to say fuck the Bible, like fuck
Yeah.
Christianity, because and what it did too is it actually gave me like because what a lot of people do is they kind of become atheists and they kind of just throw the whole Bible aside and just become like edgy. But
Mhm.
what it did for me is I kind of did that. But what I did is I came full circle with evolution because evolution it helped me put the Bible in context. It helped me say, okay, I understand why Christianity's here. It made sense evolutionarily.
Yeah, and you know, like I've thought that before too, and it kind of came about in a similar way for me, where at first I was just kind of like, oh fuck this, but then I started meeting like he's one of my best friends now, but I met this guy. His name's Cody, one of my best friends. He's like traveling the country right now in a van, having a great time, but
Hell yeah,
he's like super Christian, just loves Jesus, you know.
interesting.
But he's one of the coolest dudes I've ever met, and he's just like his philosophy on life and everything. He's always happy. He's loving, giving to everyone, and I think it's super awesome, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
And it makes me think it's like you know it may not be for me, but there's still something to it. To me, it's like not, and when I say something too, I don't mean that it's all real or whatever, but it's real in the sense like it's real to him. There's real energy attached to
Exactly,
that.
exactly.
And
Yeah, absolutely,
but
absolutely.
he's creating that, and it's real because he's creating that because he believes it.
Exactly, and it kind of it takes a while for people who, because like we have Christianity can hurt a lot of us, and so a lot of us whenever we get out we have a lot of bitterness about it. So
Yeah,
it takes time to say, oh well, I understand how it could work for some people. I understand that maybe yeah, it works for some people but
I
not
had to
all.
see it work for someone because like just where the situation I grew up in, I never saw work for anyone. Grew up in church, like I grew up in a Baptist church, and we kind of
Same.
switched around, but I always just saw hypocrisy for the most part.
Yeah.
And then as I got older, I started meeting some people who really do it, and really
Yeah.
believe it. And
Yeah.
they're not perfect by any means, but it's just the whole idea of it's like, oh, I see it works for them, and they believe it.
Yeah, and that has a lot of power. Like I realize
Really,
the power of community, like the power of Christian communities. A lot of them are very positive and uplifting, and they support each other, and they come
yeah,
together, and they fellowship, and Christianity is just their way of kind of simplifying reality and their way of kind of understanding things. Because not everyone wants to dig into it, and arguably, debatably, and this is kind of where the evolutionary perspective itself comes in, is that this is the function that religion kind of has used was it broke things down for people. Not everybody can be the shaman. Not,
yeah. No, it's funny how like I've kind of came to that conclusion. It's like it's super ironic to think that religion is a function of evolution. It's something humans needed at one point,
exactly.
because I think of that as sometimes it's like at some point in the past we needed something like religion to bring us together to build cities and progress as people,
Exactly.
as humans, and evolve. Like we needed something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So that's like you said, like that's the evolutionary perspective on religion that starts to make sense. And what you realize too is that evolution and science kind of can become a what it can do is it can kind of tear through things. Like it can basically like it can tear through Christianity and be like this is not objectively fact, and so it can really destroy things.
Yeah,
But what you do is you eventually kind of get down to this like plain slate. If you just follow science, you get down to this slate of essentially you end up in nihilism or relativism where it's like nothing matters really, nothing does objectively matter, and that can be like very destructive. But to me, nihilism is like a phase that a lot of people go through. It's a blank slate from which you can then paint or create your reality on top of that. So that's kind of the function that I see of evolution and science in the larger picture.
I can see that. Now you made me think of something. Have you heard of the bicameral mind theory?
I don't think so. I may. It sounds like something I may have heard parts or pieces of. But what is that?
So it's basically a theory. I'm not an expert on it, but the basic gist of it is that this dude. Let me see if I can find his name. What's his name? Julian Jaynes. He wrote this book in the '70s called Bicameral Mind,
Yeah.
which is basically a theory he had, which is about God being part of evolution, and that there was a time where our brains were different, and basically we heard, we had instructions, and we heard like
I see what you're saying. Like we basically had we had a piece of us that was kind of the receiver, and like
yeah,
what is
and
now our conscious mind.
experienced like auditory hallucinations telling us like to do certain things,
Yeah,
but
but
it
that
was like part of our brains.
yeah, like nowadays we would consider that ourselves. Like that's the voice. Like like I'm hungry. Like my brain just told me I'm hungry.
Yeah.
They would have been like, oh, God's telling me to eat food. Like
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and they say that like at some point it changed. Like before, we experienced our thoughts and as like auditory hallucinations, and the evidence he has to like back some of this up is really interesting. It's none of it is like proven as fact, or it's just really interesting to look at because he brings out evidence from like the Iliad and the Odyssey, like that really old text where he says if you look at like the Iliad and the Odyssey, there's really not there's not a concept of free will as far as like the humans that are in the story who are on the journey. Everything they do is directed by a god, or it's like they're not making any choices. They don't have any free will. It's like Zeus or is like, hey, I need you to go here, and then he'll get there, and then some other Greek god is like, I need you to kill this person or fight this person, and
That's so
it's all
interesting.
like they're not making any choices. The gods are guiding every single move.
And what I think that one of the things that's most interesting about that to me, like definitely makes sense, is just this idea that like so like what were the sources of that? Like what were the sources of that inspiration? Like a lot of times, like the rationalists would probably say, oh well, that's just like we evolved a kind of a nervous system that kind of could communicate these things and send signals about what you should be doing.
Yeah,
But there's always as I got deeper into like occultism and like dreams and religions and myths, like it definitely felt to me. And nowadays, like if you look at psychedelics and you look at the type of stuff that people are experiencing, there seems to be like these actual collective unconscious entities out there that debatably could be some kind of like
no, yeah,
external.
it really does seem that way. As I mean, like, I don't claim to know shit about like what's going on, what about God or the universe or what. I don't know, but I love to think about it every day. And
Hell yeah.
to me, it's like I'm completely open to the possibility there is stuff like that because especially on like LSD and mushrooms, I've experienced things where it's felt like I've been in that, or speaking with some other entity, or having some kind of spiritual like experience. Like it's where like I've talked to Jesus on acid, I've talked to Buddha on acid. But and then it's like how much of that's in your head, or is it like it's interesting to think: is there a God, or is there some kind of divine like some like divine energy in us?
Yeah,
Or
yeah, it is a question of like it's always that question of like yeah, is this real? Or really the question is like what is real? Like
yeah,
it just man, and all these things kind of loop into themselves and create this really like crazy experience that we almost can't fathom unless we have that kind of psychedelic lens. And once you're looking at it through that psychedelic lens, like that's kind of something that we really don't have the words to even express right now. Like you just can't. And even if you had the words to express it, I'm literally like I'm kind of under the belief that like our brain in our sober state just absolutely cannot process and cannot fathom these kind of concepts. It's like
yeah.
it takes something that basically puts us in this unique state that basically says, okay, we're gonna open you up to this like huge information network flow for a second. You're just gonna get a little piece of that, but that's gonna be enough to blow your fucking
No,
brain.
it's really, and it makes sense to me because it's like I used to have a friend who he told me all these ideas. I don't think they were his ideas. He read them somewhere from like a book, but this he was saying that all the things that happened in the Bible and in old religions, especially the Bible, like Moses going up to the burning bush, talking to God and everything. He was saying like burning bush, he did DMT,
Oh
like
yeah, oh yeah, oh
yeah,
yeah.
or it was like all psychedelic experiences, and I mean, it's obvious that like all these older cultures had psychedelic drugs. They had drugs just like I mean, they may not have been the same drugs. They could have been stronger back then. You never
Yeah,
know.
yeah, you really don't. Like
Technology or
there's definitely a
so
lot of evidence. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of
yeah,
evidence of earlier. Earlier tribal cultures. Like it's, the Abrahamic lineage is very interesting. But then you look at cultures today, like in the Amazon and rainforest and stuff around the world that still have shamans and still have
yeah.
psychedelic rituals and there's definitely a lot of theories about how like psychedelics were involved with the perhaps the early development of consciousness and the early development of tribalism and
Yeah,
religion and stuff like that.
the stoned ape theory. Yeah,
Yeah, I think I guess Terrence McKenna probably coined it. I don't know if you're familiar with Terrence McKenna, but that was a
yeah,
huge inspiration. He was definitely when I started like whenever acid like blasted my brain and I was just kind of like trying to piece everything back together and be like, what the fuck? Like Terrence McKenna's voice was like very kind of like, oh, here's someone who's been here and kind of understands what's going on,
hmm
and that was man.
yeah. And it's funny because if you like listen to Terrence McKenna before, without like if you've never taken any kind of drug like that, and you
You're
listen
like, what the fuck?
like, and then you do, and you're automatically like, ah,
Oh, everything you're
yeah,
talking about makes absolutely yeah. It's uncanny how that again. It's like it's one of those things where it's just like the switch just fucking flips and like all of a sudden you're online, man.
yeah.
And
But then it's also interesting to think of it. Like I try to think of things from as many perspectives as I can. I used to not always be that way, but I've gotten opened up to that over the years from things like that, and just listen to other people. But we talk about like when you start to get into this, these kind of questions, you're like, well, what is real? What is reality? You know. But it's interesting because there's that saying, perception is reality, and I've always not been a fan of that saying for some. I've just never liked it, and you know, I don't mind it now. But it's funny because if you think about it, what we perceive, can we ever really see reality, even if it was right in front of us? Because all we have to perceive are these instruments, you know, these eyes, you know, our senses, our touch, smell, our sight,
Yeah,
vision, and it's like everyone's is different, arguably, you know, and it's like all we have is these instruments to see, but what can we really see what reality is, even if it's right in front of us? Because we're just
absolutely.
perceiving
Yeah.
what we have.
It's like the idea of like if you kind of get into evolution, like one of my favorite videos was talking about how like how optics, how the eyes evolved, like starting with basic skin cells or whatever that were just like a little bit photosensitive, to like more being able to kind of make out some early forms, and from there, and like who's to say like what we're experiencing right now is not just extremely limited, like in the same way that we look back at them, like yeah, they talk. Of course, we know for a fact that we're only kind of seeing a fraction of the electromagnetic radiation spectrum, and then yeah, you have this idea too that there's other dimensions and there's other beings and layers. You know, it's like who fucking
Yeah,
knows,
and
man?
then there's the idea of like layers or dimensions we can't see, but then even on like a simpler concept, just like people who are colorblind,
Yeah,
or it's like eagles, they have more they can see more colors than humans.
yeah,
They
and
have more.
spiders have like infrared or something like that, or some kind of like extra. They have a little bit farther in the spectrum. Yeah, man, it is absolutely nuts. Like there's no telling. Like you're saying. So one thing I wanted to come back to is you talked about how yes, we are our definition of reality, our exposure to reality, com- comes through our senses. But also, I think it's also limited by our underlying framework, like our underlying psychological nervous system, our underlying perception. Like we're looking at reality through the bias of a human, through the
Yeah,
bias through the bias of a being that's trying to survive, that's trying, so there's so many things that are just kind of that come as a part of that. Like, we really can't, it's hard to fathom this kind of just like totally detached view of reality. And I think that psychedelics can get you close, or if not a temporary vision of that. And if you, I think if you are able to obtain that, I think that that is essential. That's kind of my definition of what ego death is. Is basically being able to perceive reality, even if it's just for a moment, outside of the human lens, and just kind of like from a pure, like just pure existence, just like all life, all non-life, all experience is just kind of like this one. I don't know, man.
yeah.
It's
So
fucking
have you
nuts.
ever had like a bad trip?
I wouldn't say. I mean, I would. I think like I'll base this question or the answer off of kind of like what a lot of people perceive as like a bad trip is, especially if you haven't tripped yet, or some people who've had a bad trip. It's basically like you're like having like very scary hallucinations, or like you're having like a panic episode, or like anxiety and stuff like that. And it's never really been that way for me. Like the very first time when I was around other people, and it was just I was brand new to it. I was around other people. I didn't quite know how to adjust to the situation. It was like a lot of kind of like it was just kind of overwhelming. It was just a lot. But it wasn't necessarily like I wasn't like freaking out. I wasn't having like a panic
Yeah,
attack. I wasn't like I wasn't getting into that. So I was kind of fine there. I feel like I've been someone who's has a relatively healthy kind of like psychological background, fortunately. And then as I went farther into my later experiences where I was diving deeper into myself, like I was going through some traumatic stuff. Like I was, I had a lot of emotions that I was experiencing, like a lot of anger and a lot of sadness and things that I was just getting out. But yeah, yeah,
that you were like
it was all
feeling.
healthy.
Yeah,
There was
yeah,
never
no,
there was never a time of like fear and like real like paranoia and freaking out, because I learned very quickly that I should do it in a very controlled way.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think that's great because like I've never really had a bad trip either. I've had some dark trips, you know, like you were just saying, like dealing with some pain or some emotional things. But
Yeah.
I've never really just had like a bad trip where I just like thought I was gonna be that way forever or thought I
Yeah.
was gonna die or anything.
Yeah, it's like if there was ever what you would call a negative emotion, like it was something that I needed to experience. It was just that's just
Yeah,
kind of how it was. And one thing I just thought about is how like even outside of tripping, like the lines between tripping and non-tripping have become, continually more blurred for me. Like as I, nowadays when I trip, I'm kind of like, well, this is kind of just how I think a lot of the time. Like I'm pretty much, sometimes it's just a little bit more,
Yeah.
but basically my point is that there are things in life and there are moods that I'll get into that are kind of like shitty. It's kind of like, damn. And honestly, if you think about like what a lot of that revolves around for me, is like this kind of society that we live in. It's kind of it's like these external things. I realized that the things that were really making me feel bad were not within myself. It was just like how shitty these things are on the outside. So like for example, the fact that acid itself is illegal, like that kind of make like that's what I'm saying. Like if you like imagine if you lived in a society that was like completely embraced acid and like exposed you to it in a very healthy way and guided you through it. That would be fucking fantastic. But we live in a society where it's fucking illegal. We don't understand it. It's very demonized, and it's just like so. You come into it with that pretense, and it's just not a good recipe. Like it's just like what the fuck is going on?
It's interesting though to think about that because it's like um, there's conversations about why it is illegal, and I mean like in some ways I can see how it makes sense. It's like yeah, if we had a controlled environment with like doctors or really shamans, that like spiritual experts to help administer this to people and make sure they don't have a bad trip and they get something good out of it, that would be great. But then it's like there's these conspiracy theories about how like the government, like I've heard about how the government doesn't want you to have it because it can open your mind up and
Exactly. Well, see
like I mean,
that's
it's not that far fetched, but like
that's exactly where I wanted to kind of transition from here. So like I've noticed like some of the common kind of like spheres of conversation that have come up in my podcast and in my life in general are we've gotten into conspiracies a lot, and that's always something I love to kind of touch on at least just for a second. So and that's how I came across conspiracies myself, was like I was tripping and I was like at first I was like this is fantastic, like this is really why. Oh, okay. So at first
a dollar bill or something and you're like
yeah, no, at first no, so like at first it was just overwhelming, and then step two I kind of dug deeper into it and I was like this is very interesting and it really helped me and I was like this is amazing, like. And then you ask that question, it's like, yeah, man, I just like I want to like draw a cartoon of it where like you arrive at that question, we're like, well, why is this illegal? And
yeah.
bro, like that starts the fucking rabbit hole. That starts the whole like once you start asking those questions, man, you don't come back. You basically become fucking Alex Jones very quickly.
Yeah.
Like, dude, I mean, it's just inevitable. Because, and the fact is, there's a lot of that shit that's out there. Yeah, yes, like just kind of at a glance, absolutely, the government doesn't want you to do it because absolutely it does open your mind. Like, absolutely, their modes of control, capitalism and corporatism and mental slavery, it's all very much contingent upon people's inability to connect to these spiritual forces. So like that at a glance, like that's just very obvious. But like, so what I want to kind of ask you and see what your perspective is. Like, what is like whenever you think about conspiracies, like what stands out? Like how deep down some of these rabbit holes have you kind of been interested in going?
I mean, like, I'm a pretty huge skeptic when it comes to like the government, especially. I mean, I just think like I'm sure you've heard of like the new world order or like elites, the whole conspiracy about how our government and what we see in front of us, like Donald Trump, the presidency, like he's just a little pawn in a game,
Oh yeah,
and just I've tried to get deep into it, thinking about like so I believe there's probably elites ruling the world from somewhere, and they're planning the future out, and
exactly.
we don't know what the like. To me, it's like I'm a huge skeptic about all of it, but I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the elites or whoever in high places are doing, all these principalities or whatever. I don't know what's going on. I just know there's some shit going on.
So absolutely, like, you brought up a good point. Like you want to be skeptical about like the government stuff, but you also have to kind of be skeptical about the conspiracy theories themselves.
I'm definitely skeptical about the conspiracy theories too. Like I love to delve into them, but at the same
But
time,
you
I'm
can't
like,
go too far. It's a balance.
does this guy know? It's like I just know there's some fucked up shit going on.
So here's the yeah. I think we've talked about that. I think me and Chris actually talked about that. How like it's a balance with conspiracies. You want to be skeptical about the government. You don't just want to accept everything, but you also don't want to be too conspiratorial, or else you'll become a schizophrenic. So my question is, with that kind of knowledge that like you have this feel, we all have this feeling that like there's something bigger going on. There's some elites. There's some kind of bigger picture. and it obviously affects us. Like there's people who are kind of engineering our reality. So as a person, it kind of goes back to that classic question of the Matrix. Like, do you take the red pill? Like, do you make the decision to dive deeper into it and really try to figure it out, or do you want to kind of just be like, you know what, it's too much
No,
for me. I'm
you're
just gonna
right, man.
blue pill.
And there's times where some days I do take the blue pill. I'm just like, fuck it, like it's hard, and it's like you're taking it, but you're like, I just want to go with it. I don't want to have to deal with all these thoughts or these conspiracies or having to think this way because it's way
Exactly.
easier just to go along with it.
Absolutely. It
But,
absolutely is.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
And
way
so
easier. And then some days it's just like, no, fuck that, man.
like
Like,
yeah, fuck the system. Yeah.
like we're not gonna take it.
Yeah. Yeah. Hell yeah. Yeah, again, it's definitely a balance because it's a lot. Like I got really deep and I realized it was taking a toll on me. Like if you go too deep down the rabbit holes, like you can really lose touch. And so it has to be a balance. But I've always found that I really want to be a force that really pushes in the red pill direction because
Mhm.
I think if you just consider like the spectrum of like how collectively balanced we are, like as a society, I think as a society we need to be a lot more skeptical. And that's the thing too, is that like really I think one of the big problems of conspiracies is that if you I think here's where you establish the balance and here's where you draw the line is saying you don't want to know too much more than you have the ability to do something about, because if you know a ton of stuff
No,
about
you're
what's
right.
going on,
You can't
if
do
you know
nothing.
if you know a ton about what's going on, but you don't really have anybody to talk to about it, and you don't really have anything that you can do about it, that kind of it doesn't create a flow, it doesn't create a balance.
Yeah.
But like if if you spend some time with it, and you kind of set up an infrastructure and you kind of give yourself a platform, or you've plugged yourself in a way to where the more you know about this stuff, like if you're trying to be a politician or you're trying to be a political commentator or you're trying to be a fucking Alex Jones, well at that point it's like you need that fuel and you're ready to
Mhm.
fucking tackle that
Yeah.
shit head on. And
Yeah,
so
and I think you do need people like that, who are ready to tackle it head on. But to me, it's like trying to think of like a solution, because like being an artist, like I want to affect the world in a positive way. I want to like take what I've learned and what I believe and what I feel and like pass it on to people and try and help others. And it's like, what is the best way to make people aware of things like that? Like here's the red pill, or how to stop the matrix, and stop that mass like just mass idea that they're pushing to us through media. And it's like I think a lot about media whenever I watch what's going on in the news and what's highlighted and what's news nowadays.
right.
It's just like we're, as a country, it's like we're made to believe this is what we are, being plugged into this like riots going on, and it's like how much of this is real, it's like, or how much of this is just an isolated incident, like
Yeah.
with the one thing that blew my mind, like did you see the kid with the MAGA hat who like
Yeah, yeah, of
all,
course. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, with the Indian, it's just like stuff like that, like the fact that that's made that's like news, and it's like that is what people are seeing, our like a lot of people are seeing our country as
Yeah,
is
absolutely. Yeah, it's absolutely engineered. Whether
yeah,
it's kind of edited, or whether just it may be completely true, but just the fact that they're focusing so much on this and not on this. Like yes, the mainstream news. I mean, a lot of news has biases, but mainstream news is definitely very engineered, and it has a lot of corporate interest behind it, of course. So yeah, yeah, that's pretty
yeah,
straightforward.
yeah, and it's just like you know do you want to really, it's like, is it helping having like a battle, you know what I mean, like I love people like Alex Jones and these people who I mean, I think Alex Jones is nuts, but I love to listen to him,
Yeah,
he's nut house,
that's
but
what I'm saying. Like like someone has to do it. Like
like,
someone
dude,
has
I mean, like,
someone
dude,
has to.
like he's talking about human pig embryos and all this crazy shit. I'm
It,
like, dude,
it's
I mean,
but it's
I
real
wish
shit.
the government like it is probably doing some shit like that, really. But it's like this whole battle that's going on is it there because it's not because we're making a battle, but they're fighting us and we're trying to fight back. But what is the best way to fight back? Because you see what happened to Alex Jones. He's deplatformed, which may be better for him. I don't know. Like I I don't know a lot about that. Like I don't go on Infowars too much. I don't know a lot about Alex Jones. I've seen him on the Joe Rogan podcast, and I've seen him talk, and I've seen Infowars a few times. But it's like that thing that happened to him. It's like that's what our country's getting to, is that a country with free speech, people are getting deplatformed for using their right to
Oh
free
yeah.
speech.
And that's actually something I know whenever we talked about topics like before, like before we even started the podcast, you had mentioned that like you were interested in the kind of like free speech and censorship, and that's something that we've talked about a lot because obviously it's a very prevalent issue. I always kind of, like, I was exposed to Alex Jones, and especially back in the day when I was in the conspiracy, I was kind of listening a lot. But then from there, I kind of blue pilled a little bit, got adjusted to society, and I kind of
Mhm.
just saw him as a meme for a while. But whenever I saw him getting deplatformed from everything, I was like, something's going down, and I started listening to him even more. And so yeah, like you're saying, it may have, they call it like Barbra Streisand effect or whatever, or I don't know, Barbra Streisand effect. Basically, like if you try to censor someone, a lot of times that gives them more attention because it's like, well, why? Everyone's like, why are you trying to censor this person?
Mhm.
So
That's
it
the
did
same
that.
thought I had. I was like, wait a minute, why are they censoring this? They're like, because like before that, I'm like Alex Jones. He's the dude talking about gay frogs, and like
Exactly, just
him
just the
as a
memes.
meme like that, and then he gets deplatformed. Like he must have said something. Like,
Yeah, it absolutely, yeah, it really is kind of, I love that it works that way. I love that these, like, whatever these entities are that are trying to censor, like it basically just kicks back at them. But yeah, man, that's the world we're in. Like there's powerful people that have their interests, and you have someone like Alex Jones who's really hitting on some truth and really shaking some shit up. And they're like, it's just shaking shit up, and they've got to do so. They've got to do something about it. And unfortunately, like their mechanisms aren't very good.
yeah,
So that's the kind of thing that gives me a lot of optimism about reality, is that like truth will always prevail. Like, the more you try to cover it up, like, you can't do it.
hmm
So yeah, I'm pretty optimistic about it. But there's definitely some interesting shit going on. I definitely recommend like diving deeper into it. And one point I wanted to make too is that one thing I've been thinking a lot about, like, I'm very invested in like kind of technology as a solution. And one of the
yeah,
things I kind of want to do is like, uh, in the same way that we like, let's say we vote for like a governor, for example, or we vote for like a senator. Well, that's like one senator to represent like millions of people. Like, I really want to kind of break down the political spectrum into like the political hierarchy into a lot more layers. Like, I want it to basically be like for example, let's say that you're someone who, you have this certain balance. You're like here's as red pilled as I really can stand to be, but I understand, like, I want to fight that battle, and I understand that it's important and that people like that are needed, and I'm going to support you, but it's not my job, it's not my role, I don't feel called to do that. So what
yeah,
I kind of want to do is create a system to where you can basically say, hey, like, you're more knowledgeable, you're more well researched in this. I'm going to essentially give you like my voting power. Like, I'm going to kind of vote for you in a way. Like, and this is just like peer to peer. Like, let's say like among 20 of our friends, we find the one of us who is like the most like researched and knows what they're doing, and like, hey, like, we kind of collectively nominate you to be like our local like our local representative, and then
yeah.
it just kind of builds layers from there. That way we feel more connected. So that's kind of just like an idea I wanted to mention.
No, yeah, I mean, I like the idea of that, and that kind of gets back to what we were talking about when we first started this, like community and getting more a little localized, like with the community and being a part of it, And
Absolutely.
to me, that's what I think, opposed to like all the fighting, would really make a difference, and just trying to tackle the issues or trying to like make people aware of the issues and trying to fight it. Really, I think if we could get to where we're not focused so much on all this stuff like mass media, what we're being fed, and if we focus more on our communities and just like you said, like getting along, we like getting together with our friends and discussing these ideas and seeing who, this guy's done more research on this and this guy's done more research on this, and it's like putting people in places where they need to be, because it's like when I see these things on the news, like about racism or hate crimes, stuff going on, it's like that's the picture painted of what our country is.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
like when I'm out in the city, I don't see shit like that really.
Exactly. You
Yeah,
can you decide what to tune into. You decide what to tune into. Like, and
yeah,
you can create your own
so we
reality.
can
Like,
tune into what we got going on around us instead of these isolated incidents, or
yeah,
maybe
being
more
distracted.
down
We're being distracted. Absolutely.
exactly. It's a huge distraction. If we could just not even take the red pill or the blue pill and just focus on what we got going on around us
Right
more
here in front of us.
at the
Yeah.
moment. Yeah,
Absolutely. Like that's definitely like a good kind of like holistic point and the theme that kind of connects to a lot of what we've been talking about. Like you're saying, like this idea of community, local community, what's right around you, this idea of specialization of people have their different interests and their different talents, and we can all work together within that towards common goals. And I kind of, and we may be close to closing out depending on where you're at, but like I was thinking about kind of like the Terrence McKenna quote where he's like basically don't consume. He's like he create, you know, and that kind of like ties back into even what we started talking about, which is like music and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of wraps a lot of it up. I guess that's a lot of what I had kind of coming into it. Is there any other directions or anything you kind of were
Yeah,
interested in
no,
going into in particular?
all day I was trying to think of a few things to talk about, and one thing that kept coming in my head is, so I have a question for you. I wanted to ask, do you think music is universal? Do you think it's like a universal language?
Um, so is it a universal language? I'd say yes. Like across cultures, music is one of those things, kind of like a smile or like a dance, where it's like or even art, where it's just like, yeah, we resonate with that. Like this idea that, like, for example, that certain music would evoke certain emotions.
Yeah.
I think that's very universal. I think that there is an objectivity to music and art. Like there is like within art there is like an objective idea of what is beautiful and what makes you feel a certain way, and within music there's an objective idea about chords and stuff that would make you feel angry, or chords that make you feel like aggressive or versus like happy or sad, you know. So in that sense I would say yes. Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Well, no, I like growing up for a long time. My kind of idea on it was, yeah, it's universal. You know, you could get together with people from all these different cultures and play a song, and everybody's gonna get it. Everybody's gonna dance. But then it's like the more I started studying music and getting into it and studying like world music and history of music, and just like I realized that I don't believe it's necessarily true, really. I mean, I think it's universal in the fact that yes, every culture has some form of music,
Right.
but it's like you have music, and what is music really? It's like vibration, you know, it's sound, but so is like talking, you know, speech, or so is just banging on something. You make a vibration, but the difference is like all in our minds, you know, it's all conceptual first off. So it's like in our minds somewhere we have this part of us that's telling us the difference between me talking to you right now, and then if I was singing to you, you know, you register that as music, or if I was playing guitar. And then to go even further than that, it's like I've done some studying on like other cultures and what music is in their culture and in their environment, and I've kind of come to the conclusion that like I believe music and what you see as music and what you experience as music all comes down to like cultural conditioning, you know, like out here in the West we're conditioned our whole lives a certain way to where when we hear certain music it evokes certain emotions. And then it's like there is some universal things like crying, you know, everyone cries, but then it's like uh, I'll give you an example. So there's in Thailand there's these Buddhist priests who they're not allowed to sing songs. They're like forbidden from singing and music in any kind of way like that. But then they have these ceremonies where they'll get up and they'll pray, but you listen to it and it sounds just like singing. And you know, I've seen the videos and I watch it and I'm like, hey, it looks like they're singing. But to them, that's not what it is at all. It's like, you know, higher speak. It's like prayer. And then it's just interesting when you start to think of it that way. And then there was another study I saw done where it's like these cultures in Africa, like tribes who these people went over and brought some like Western music to them, you know, like some pop music, and showed it to them. They didn't even hear it as music. They're just like, oh, it's just sound, you know. Like,
Like what
they
the
didn't
fuck is
respond
this?
to it
Yeah.
in any emotional way, you know.
Yeah.
And it's just it's funny to think about it that way. How all these different cultures see music differently, and what like a happy sound in Western music may strike like a sad emotion. That same chord could strike like a sad emotion in a culture across the globe, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you know, my initial reaction was that yes, there is an element of it that's universal, but
Yeah.
but obviously there's going to be a lot of it that is specific to the cultural context, that's specific to the linguistic context. So yeah, I absolutely see that other element of it. There's certain things that may register in a different way, or that may go completely over the head of one or the other, and so I definitely agree with that. And then I also just kind of like this idea. It sounds like you're very interested in it, and you've spent some time kind of understanding this kind of link between
Yeah.
culture and music, and I definitely I definitely I think that my two primary domains are kind of like culture and technology. Those are two big areas that I look into, and so within culture, you see all these different dimensions of culture. You see like kind of the linguistics behind it, the music behind it, the food, there's so many elements that constitutes culture, and it is very interesting to study. Like culture is another thing that has evolved into so much complexity and so much diversity, and
Yeah.
it's very interesting. I definitely would like to be exposed to more cultures.
Yeah, no, and like it's man, I had a thought where I was going with that. Hold up. God damn it.
It's in there.
Yeah, it's in there, man. It was like right here until I was about to say something. And it
I keep a notepad so I can like if like so I can like jot little ideas that I think about like while the other person's talking if I want to, because
yeah.
sometimes I have like 4 points I want to make. I'm like this, but I don't know.
Oh yeah, yeah, I got it. So like, no, it's funny because music. I talk about like I say music is a language, but it's not a language in the sense of like you use symbols to convey a certain meaning of something, like in linguistics, like you have an A, you know what that means, you have the letter A, it's not that kind of language, but at the same time, it's like um,
It does communicate something though. It does express
yeah,
something.
yeah, and then as a musician too, like I learned through like playing jazz music and learning like jazz standards and playing with like a few jazz guys. It's like the people who play jazz, they communicate through music, and it's so wild to see because I didn't get it at first, but the more I saw these guys and played with them, it's like I saw that they would communicate with music. You'd have someone do a lick over here, and they were basically telling you like, "Hey, I'm gonna do a syncopated beat right here, so you do something in between that." And they're talking through music
Oh
and
yeah,
like
it's
giving
it's
each other
it's
love.
beautiful.
Yeah, and then it's like how it's a language, but not in the sense of like I just said, like symbols conveying meanings, but it is conveying meaning.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. Like, yeah, it just depends on how you define language. Like if you have a very like concrete definition of language, like you have actual symbols and words that
Yeah,
express a very concrete idea. But no, like I would say that language is essentially like anything that expresses, anything that kind of conveys something. And music is absolutely a beautiful medium yeah, I love it.
yeah, yeah, and it makes me wonder if like it seems like it's something that's human. It's something that's very human. I don't, I that I know of. There's not really, and there's definitely musical elements out in nature, but it's like animals. Do they hear music? Does that register to them, or is that just a completely human thing that we put meaning to? That we ascribe this meaning to when we hear like a whale singing or
Oh
we
yeah.
hear the crickets singing? It's like, is that what they're doing, or is it just it's a human thing and that's what we see it as?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I guess on first glance, you would kind of assume there really isn't much music in nature, but like like you said, there's number one like whales and certain like flying creatures
Well, if you
communicate
take
with.
some LSD and go out in the woods, you'll hear some music in
Oh yeah,
nature.
yeah. Well, nature itself has is kind of a symphony and has its own sound, and then within each organism, and then like apparently the planets themselves kind of emit certain frequencies, and like yeah, a lot of that kind of like constitutes like how music exists in nature, but we've also tapped into something like we've definitely kind of in the same way that we've kind of adapted to nature and we've kind of purposed nature. We definitely like tapped into like between our voice, between our instruments. We've definitely like tapped into something very unique, and one thing I definitely see like whenever you kind of talk about music and culture, and you talked about kind of like some of the Tibetans and or
Yeah,
whatnot, like the monks, like you definitely see a lot of that. Like of course within like in the ways, again, like whenever we talk about the way that we have eyes and ears, like these are the ways that we can interpret reality. And so
mm,
whenever you're talking about the absolute, the most transcendent, the most magical, the most spiritual ways that we can interpret reality, it definitely a lot of it comes through the audio. So like you see like the Tibetans have like their ohms, and like a lot of tribes have their chanting and singing, and Christianity has its hymns, and you just see a lot like that's an expression for us. Like that's a very emotional, powerful way that we can express and understand reality for
yeah,
sure. Absolutely.
yeah. Well, how long have we been on this thing? I don't even remember what time we started.
I don't actually, the way I'm recording, I don't actually have a counter, but it's been about, I want to say we started around I don't know, like 8:30 maybe. It's probably been close to an hour or so.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm down to keep talking, or if you want to close it out or have something to do, I mean, whatever.
No, not in particular. I'm just kind of. I know my voice starts to get hoarse after a while, but I think we covered some good bases. Like we talked about, we started out talking about music. We got into psychedelics, spirituality. We kind of touched on conspiracies a little bit. We talked about community, and you kind of took us on this path of music and culture. Um, I had two topics that I am interested in, that you may have some perspective on. One is just like politics in general, which I think that kind of it spins off of a lot of what we've already said. I think we've talked about kind of like community. We've talked about some of the influence of the government. We've talked about that.
Yeah,
I'm honestly not too. Usually, I end up talking about politics to people who are more versed than myself, and I'm not even very versed. So that's one little one, and then also like technology. I'm very into technology, but we've already kind of covered that too. We talked about a lot about like censorship and freedom of speech, which is a lot of what we got into. My last podcast with Kyle was like 100% about technology, so I'm more than willing to. Yeah, I like that each conversation kind of takes on its own focus and takes on its own theme, and
yeah,
it definitely sounds like you have a lot of interest in kind of like music as like a language, as an expression, as a mode of understanding, and we.
yeah. Well, I mean, even as if you think about this, like as a cultural force, like as like a force to fight with, like in if you think about movements throughout history, like you have the counterculture movement with all the hippies, and all that music and the drugs and everything that was involved. A big part of that was music. There was other parts to it. And then you even have like in the civil rights movement, music was a huge part of that.
Oh yeah, yeah, because
Uh,
it captures an emotion. Like it captures an emotion in a way that a lot of times words can't really do. And you're absolutely right. Like whenever we talk about the tools that we have to kind of improve the world and express ourselves and kind of make a difference, yeah, music is
oh, it's a great,
incredibly
yeah,
powerful.
because you had like gospel groups back in the civil rights movement who were going and traveling around, and they were performing and singing, but they were supporting this civil rights, and they were coming to different churches and white churches and talking about this. But they use music as not really a guise, but as a way to make people feel more comfortable. Instead of just there's these colored people coming to their churches and they're trying to talk about civil rights. Instead, they're coming and they're singing songs about
Yeah, they're
community,
expressing absolutely.
together, and that really made a difference instead of them just coming and talking to people who otherwise wouldn't have really given them a chance.
Absolutely, like it can do so much. It can express so much. It can bring people together in so many ways. Like I've had a lot of magical experiences. Like one of the first kind of scenes that I got involved with was kind of like the electronic scene. So like there's a lot of love in the EDM communities. Like it's just a lot of pure
Oh
expression.
yeah, man, yeah, it really is. I was in that scene a few years ago in Atlanta, and I mean, I got a lot out of it, and there were like everything, I had good and bad
Of
experiences,
course, yeah.
but overall, I met some beautiful people through it, and really saw like that. Just like we were talking about Christianity, I saw some people that didn't get it and some people who really got
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
And
Like
then I saw in that scene how there's people who really believed that and really had it,
that
and
is
they,
a type of Christianity for a lot of people. Like it definitely is. It definitely
yeah,
transcends into that spiritual realm, and I appreciate that. Like I really do. Um, and then yeah, you have other scenes too. Like I've seen some hardcore metal scenes where like a lot of that aggression is really expressed. And then you
in a
have like a
very
lot.
yeah, in a very healthy way.
Exactly, absolutely. It's one of the more healthy ways you can do it. And then of course
Yeah,
I've come across some more like DIY indie scenes where there was some unique kind of flavor and some unique emotions. So, and I've always found like in my the way that I study culture, and I like to think about like what are some of the main divisions of culture? What are some of the main ways that I can understand culture? And music, I think second, I think number one is just like is like your absolute like your ethnic background. Like if you're from this region of the world and like you're historically rooted in this culture, like that's like the most primary dominant culture, the underlying kind of like framework. But then outside of that, I think that music comprises like the next most
right.
powerful thing. Like
Yeah, and I mean, now with the internet, like ethnocentrism probably won't even be a thing in like 10 years. Like just with how connected we can be with
right.
people around the world, this whole idea of like growing up. in a certain culture, and say you're someone who didn't have a lot of experiences in outside of your own culture, when you're exposed to like completely different cultures, completely different music, you may not know what it is, and it just may just be weird, it may be weird to you just because it's not normal considered it with your own culture and what you know. But now with the way the world's going, and we can have all these different like mediums and modes of learning through the internet, through music, and all that's so much more accessible now. I mean, I'm very optimistic about the future,
Same.
just because of like technology and the way we're connected. I think it'll fix a lot of problems. I just think right now it's kind of like wild wild west.
Yeah,
Like,
it is, man. There's a lot of shit up in the air. Like a lot of what's going to happen here in the next few years is going to be very critical to like the long term. It's definitely I think it's a time of testing. But yeah, I definitely try to be optimistic in general. One thing I wanted to come back to, you said is very interesting, is like how this idea of like, what do you say, like ethnocentrism is kind of dissolving, because like we don't, like we're so intermingled and we're so diverse now in terms of like in terms of traditional culture. So it's like a lot of people don't identify with their, a big component of that is religion. So between the religion and between the things that would typically comprise someone's culture, like for example, before you had a lot of music, like for example, like here in the South, like it was just kind of the South was a pretty homogenous culture that did the same kind of things, listened to the same kind of music and stuff. But like I said earlier, like because of the modern day and technology and the internet and the fact that people can travel and whatnot, we just have this explosion and this diversity. And so one thing I was thinking that was really cool, I talked about how like music is kind of comprises like the new kind of framework for culture. It's almost like now we might actually that might actually become the thing. Like rather than thinking about things in terms of like American culture and like European culture, you think about it like, here's the metal culture, and here's the it's almost like it's almost like you'll have like a whole city, you'll have like a whole like culture of like this music. That's very interesting to think about.
You have like your metal faction, you have your
Yeah,
country faction, and
but it's like that. Like it's absolutely like that, especially for young, especially for, well. See, here's the thing too, though.
that would be
Is it?
amazing too.
See,
That'd be absolutely amazing.
I think one of the things about it though is that a lot of it's just it's a factor of age. Like whenever you're kind of like, between the time of like basically becoming like puberty, kind of becoming like an adult or whatever, to basically until you kind of like really settle down and have kids. I think that whole stretch is heavily defined by like different, like I think that's where music really is alive, heavily in that. Because after that, I think after you kind of settle down, a lot of people kind of they then look for the things that a more traditional cultural experience would provide. Like that's when you see a lot of people maybe looking for like a more peaceful, like for example, can you imagine someone like having like a 3-year-old and they're like, and then they're still like hardcore like mosh pit and shit. Like I just can't. I have a
No,
hard.
no, yeah. I mean, things would change, and like you said, I think it's as you get older. Because I mean, even I'm only 24, and the way I thought, like the things I wanted 5 years ago is way different. Like I used to never think about family or like a significant other, or just I just wanted to travel and be on the road, do all this different stuff. And then it's like I still want to do those things. I still want to travel around the world, but then it's like now I think more about the future. It's like it'd be nice to have like a family to like, so I won't be lonely when I
Yeah,
die.
exactly right. Yeah, yeah. Your values definitely change a lot. And one thing I was gonna say is that one thing that I've always found is interesting is that how like the music itself can be like a kind of a metric of how you're changing. Like as you kind of like a lot of times, like again, if you have a time, like if you have a lot of angst and a lot of rebellion, you may really identify with metal. But as you kind of get older and you settle and you settle down.
Like I was saying, I grew up with that, and I listened to strictly metal for a long time, and like metal and rock. And then once my mind started to open up to different things, like what really opened up my mind to just a whole new world of thinking was reggae music. I
Hey.
metal like forever, metal and
Yo,
rock
well, see,
forever.
man, and if you want to talk about how you want to talk about this kind of link between music and spirituality, man, reggae,
Reggae knows what's up.
like I've thought about like different music that I like
Hmm.
that correlate with different kinds of states of consciousness, and absolutely, of course, there's a huge link between reggae and cannabis, and to me, that's kind of like definitely like a higher vibration where you're kind of like just like really flowing with the universe. And then if you want to get even deeper, like if you get into like the fucking acid and stuff, I've always found that shit like psytrance and psy dub, which is kind of like has some
Yeah.
has some similarities between dubs sometimes. Like Yeah, man, that stuff will take you to like a man.
No,
Of
yeah,
course,
man.
music and
For me, it opened up my mind to so many different, not even in music, like it opened my mind up to different genres, different ways of thinking. It really opened me up to a lot of positive thinking. Because I
yeah.
was really an angry dude for
Dude,
years.
what we should, you know what we should do? Like, whenever the weather starts to get warm, and I just want to go outside and hang out with friends, I always think about like let's get together and play some reggae. Like, let's just have some reggae music
Yes,
and just like
dude.
fucking have a cookout, dude. We should definitely get that together one day when it gets warm. We'll
That
go to
could
a
be
park.
definitely possible, you know, because like we're both Atlanta or Georgia at least, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like we can make it happen. Absolutely, we'll definitely shoot for that because those are the good vibes right there. Like that's for me, that's like one of the peak experiences is just like having like a little community event outdoors with some like good chill music, man. It fits perfectly.
Yeah, the reggae just heals, man. Like this is a great story. My friend probably wouldn't mind me telling this story, but I'm not gonna say his name anyway. But I had this buddy who he took some acid one day. It was like his first or second time, I think, and he had known that I had experience with it, so he was having a really fucked up trip, and he called me. I was like at my sister's graduation or something. I was like, "Hey, dude, can I answer the phone right now?" He's like, "Dude, it's super important. Please answer the fucking phone. It's like really important." So I go outside. I'm like, "Are you all right, dude?" He's like, "Dude, I just took some acid. Am I gonna be like this forever?"
That's the big question.
And he was freaking out and just not having a straight up not having a good
Straight up
time.
not having a good time right
Yeah,
now,
he was
bro.
straight up not having a good time. I told him to do this. I was like, dude, get on your skateboard, go to the store, grab you like some fruit or some juice, and go to the park, put some headphones in with some reggae music. He didn't even fuck with the reggae at that time. He called me back like an hour and a half later. I was like, dude, I'm having the best day of my life.
Hell yeah, dude. It has that power. It absolutely has that
Yeah,
power. That's what's
yeah,
up. Yeah, reggae does have some healing vibes. It's definitely like very interesting frequency and like for them like the whole Rastafarian culture and like the Jah like whatever like
yeah.
it is very spiritual. I definitely appreciate that. We'll definitely have to dive into that sometime.
Yeah, man. And I mean, yeah, I'm probably am gonna get off here pretty soon, but like I'd be down to come back another time in the future for another podcast if you want to dive more into some stuff like that.
Yeah,
But
absolutely, man. That's all. It's always great to just kind of like this is pretty much us meeting like talking for the first time. So I'm sure we'll stay in touch and have some more ideas and build it up and yeah, hell yeah, man. Have some events and stuff and just keep the ball rolling. That's what it's all about.
yeah, sounds good to me.
Hell yeah, dude. Well, we've called it that, I guess. Yeah, we've been going for a while. We've covered a lot of topics. I guess we'll shoot for there, man. I appreciate you coming on.
All right, no problem. I
All right.
appreciate
Hell yeah,
you,
man.
man. You talking.
All right, man. See ya.
Peace.